Hi, I'm Rigger. This is Your Right, and what an episode! We are back with RWBY Volume 9, Episode 2. So, if you're new around here, this is a thoughts video. What that means is it's not a reaction. You have to have seen the episode to get what I'm talking about, and I'm just going to use a few images here and there to illustrate my points as we talk our way through this episode. The good, the bad, and the depressing. We are certainly making progress through this story, which is something I'd like to talk about when we dive into it. So, without further ado, this is RWBY Volume 9, Episode 2. Immediately, what I'd like to talk about is how the different characters in this volume are picking up very defined roles very quickly. Like, we know the girls, we know how they interact, we know their personalities, but dropping into this episode, each of them is really picking up on a role in the story. And what I mean by that is it's almost more defined than usual. It's almost like a character shift, but it feels like it's being illustrated and presented by the world. As they are moving into a story, they are becoming storybook characters almost. You have, well, Ruby's the most complicated with her darker feelings and what she's going through. You have Weiss, who is trying to logic everything out and go straight for the ending and not play along. You have Yang, who is very much taking the comedic relief role. And you have Blake, who herself calls herself the moral of this story, who is trying to get them to pay attention to the story they know and recognize that they're following the steps of the story and what those things could mean, and also cautioning them about what they're doing. So you really have this interesting dynamic of taking these characters we already know, but shifting them just slightly to go along with their previous experiences and still be themselves, but take up these storybook roles. Before I go too deep into the story, because I have a lot to talk about, I'd like to just start off by praising the animation again. You can really see the time and polish given to a lot of the expressions and the movements. And what I mean by that is there's a lot more jokes here than you would think, which I'll get into later, but they are being presented a lot stronger than they were. A lot of the character animation, a lot of the beats that they're hitting on, just have more time and craft into them. They're not different jokes than we've had before. They're not a different style of jokes. Like, someone said something and everyone freezes. That happens like 4 times this episode. That's not a bad thing. It's just a way of presenting a certain type of humor, but it's more polished here, and it's coming off a lot better. So, I'd like to praise all the animators in their role in that and the direction, because their jokes, while they're not, laugh out loud funny a lot of the time, they are hitting and they are feeling storybook-like. They are feeling fairy tale-like. They're those little punchy jokes per scene, and they're actually providing a really good juxtaposition to a lot of the darker things we're starting to get into. And that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit more, is the role of comedy here. Because you could easily say that some of this comedy is misplaced, that Yang shouldn't be especially this jokey. But it's always been a part of her character, but a part we've explored less and less. However, from her perspective, yes, everything's bad, but they can't do too much about it right now except go through what they're trying to go through. And her way of coping is joking. We've mentioned that before, especially if you remember when we were inside the whale, that you don't have to turn everything into a joke. That, it's her way of coping with things. And she's doing that a lot here. She's really having to cope, but she is therefore going overboard on the jokes. She's making jokes in every single scene. And again, she's almost fulfilling that storybook role. She's the sort of straightforward but comedic relief. I'm gonna go punch him, that kind of thing. And while you could claim that's misplaced, in fact, I think a lot of people are going to criticize and say it's misplaced, that they're being so jokey, it really fits her character, and it really is the opposition to Ruby, because there is no joy in Ruby. Everything is a downer, everything is bad and getting worse. And then you have the fringe characters of the group, which are Weiss and Blake is leaning more towards Yang, but realizing where they're making mistakes, and Weiss is picking up on what Ruby's putting down, although, again, both of them having their issues. And, as we'll see in this episode, Weiss isn't dealing with it too well either. But the two big ends of the spectrum are the sisters. But anyway, let's get back to the story and start from the beginning. So we left looking at the world, and it's here where Blake posits they're in a fairy tale, and they even deduce they're in the ever after. And of course, Weiss is resistant, Yang isn't sure, Ruby's just sort of going along. And it's here where we start getting some details. and we start hearing things that we haven't heard in the show yet. Things like Alex, talking about the fairy tale. And there's almost a weakness here where the only thing I'll say is we don't really know the fairy tale in the show. Like, this isn't a full fairy tale we've heard in the show. And because of that, I mean, we all know Alice in Wonderland, like, as an audience, but because we don't know the specifics in the show, it means that as we're going along, they're talking about this story they all know and the audience doesn't, at least in the particulars. And I'm not sure if that's going to be a letdown, because there's a big part of this later in the episode that is them deciding to follow the steps of the story. And even though most people know the general beats of Alice in Wonderland, that doesn't mean we know necessarily all the beats that happen in this version. Case in point being, she escapes through the tree. They talk about that Alex escaped through the tree. That doesn't happen in Alice in Wonderland, you don't escape through a tree. So just little particulars like that mean that the stepping stones aren't as laid out as you think they might be. Which is interesting to me when we had the Ruby Fairy Tales episodes and we didn't have The Girl Who Fell Through the World as a full tale. It really makes me think that perhaps we would have benefited from The Girl Who Fell Through the World being one of those fairy tale episodes put out, but done in a more simplistic step-by-step way, just so we got the general beats of it without all the details. But either way, we're still at the start of the story. We got a lot to talk about this episode. So, they have their conflict about, is this real, is this not? And we learn what Yang told the others while Ruby was knocked out, about the story of her arm, that it was taken by a talking raccoon on a wagon full of junk. And it's here where our key little player Little comes in. First of all, confirming this is the Ever After, because this is where I live, and confirming that the raccoon is Jinxie, the peddler, who is a thief, although Little says it's fair game because he only takes the things we weren't looking at, and who sells them. We'll get into that in a second. The other thing they do is they do lay out the beats of the story just in Blake's speech as she goes through what happened in the story. That Alex fell, met the hunter mice, was caught in vines, fought a Jabberwocker, had a knife stolen by the raccoon. So that's all the things we've done so far, although different characters have done different things. Then, beat the Red King at a board game, we'll get back to that. Met the Curious Cat, which we know we're going to do. The Rusted Knight. Hey, it could be one of two people, actually. It could be the Smith, although it's more likely, in this case, the Jean Knight. And then they got out through the tree. So, the things we have left to do on that very short form explanation is the last four. Beat the Red King, meet the Curious Cat, Rusted Knight, out through the tree. And at the end of this, I'm going to talk about pacing, so we'll get back to that. But next we get on to doing something that this episode does at least twice, where it talks kind of meta, or it seems to, about the story and some of the audience reaction that has happened to the latest volumes. That, well, they say Alex was a bad person, or Yang does, that she lied and cheated her way through most of the book. But that's countered with, no, she was trying to survive. And then Weiss chimes in at the end with the most important bit, the morals of those old tales are so simplistic. This seems to be a pretty overt reference to especially Volume 8, with people being mad at Ruby for lying and, cheating sort of thing, that the team was lying and those issues there that will never stop in debate about if they did the right thing and they didn't have enough info and they were just trying to survive is the counter, and that your morals in these tales aren't so simplistic, that you're looking at it as bad and good, black and white, when the truth is in the middle. I'm not here to hold a whole debate about if Ruby was right or Ironwood was right, because, they were both kind of wrong. But they were both just doing what they thought was best and followed their characters and did what they thought they had to do to survive. If you disagree with that, that's on you. But the same thing here. Is Alex justified in the mistakes she made because she was just trying to survive? And there are consequences for those mistakes. We hear about consequences in the book, that there's a war in the village when she, starts a riot with the Jinxie trade. Alex does that in the book, and that will happen here. And is that wrong or right? Well, it might not be wrong or right. It's just, it's a thing you do to try and survive, and there are consequences, and this, being in the Ever After, is the consequences. Things didn't go well for Team Ruby. Penny is dead. Lots of other people are dead, and they're trapped here. This is the consequences of their actions. And the morals aren't so simplistic. Maybe we shouldn't be looking at it, audience, they're trying to say to you, maybe we shouldn't be looking at it as wrong and right. It's people trying to survive, making certain choices, and this is the result. But in probably a clever writing beat to try and distract the audience from realizing they're talking directly to you, they move into things people really want to see, which is that Blake and Yang start walking off together, getting lost in each other's conversation. You have unarmed and disarming jokes from Blake. You have their hands brushing each other as they're walking. You know, this is happening. And even Weiss comments, it's about time, and Ruby doesn't even notice, time for what. But that's not Ruby being ignorant, that's Ruby being so lost in her own thoughts, in her depression, in all the horrible thoughts running through her head to even notice the things around her, the social interactions. But they are hinting at that that's gonna happen. But also, I do wonder how it's going to play into things, because again, you have Blake trying to be jokey and, match up to Yang, who is being very jokey, but Blake has identified herself as the moral of this story. She said, I never thought I'd be the moral in a story. So, will she at some point have to, reel Yang in? And that might be a thing, that it takes that connection with Blake, a more romantic connection than a family one, say with Ruby, to snap Yang out of some of these tendencies again, to say, hey, maybe stop joking, let's face up to this. And that might be where things get really real between them. Not in a bad way, but in a, we need to talk about this, we need to conquer these hurdles, you need to, realize what you're doing. Because I can definitely see a clear route where there's a good chance Yang ends up, not an antagonist, but ends up pissing off the other members of the team because she won't stop joking, because she doesn't know what else to do, right? Like, they get sick of her being the comic relief, especially Ruby. And those two need to have a conversation still. They have since last volume, and they never really got to hash it all out. And just as you're getting all caught up in your Bumblebee, well, Weiss starts having her break, where as the bees walk off flirting, you instead have Ruby and Weiss hanging back to talk, and Ruby's dour tone brings out the, darker parts of Weiss, where she realizes that, they failed, that, despite Ruby saying you did your best for Atlas, it wasn't enough. We did not succeed. That at least a part of any identity she has with Atlas, or Atlas itself, is all gone. That no longer exists. The city does not exist, let alone her home, or any of her family that was there, or institutions that were there. Now, not all of them are dead, but she also doesn't know the fate of all of them, and they don't know the fate of the relics. They do know the fate of Penny, and that went badly. They have no idea. And I do like that they brought up maybe Winter and Jean got it out. They don't know, and it's going to be more confronting when they come up to Jean, because they're building up that reveal that Jean fell too, and he's going to know even more, and that's going to crush them even more when he's like, nah, Cinder got the relics, this all went terribly. So we've set up that domino to fall later, which is good, and you start seeing the darkness taking over Weiss's thoughts of, this is not a positive outcome, and she is really struggling. Although Ruby is struggling far more, it seems. And almost in a way, Ruby is struggling to be there for Weiss. The things she's saying aren't really that reassuring, but Ruby is so lost in her own head and her depression to, I think, notice. Which is not a negative and not a bad thing on her character, it's just she's being consumed by darkness. But from here we get to more comedic moments as they get to a bridge to the other acre. Across the bridge is further than Little has ever been from home, and he's happy to just live here, he'll make a house, live here, because he doesn't know his purpose. I don't know his gender, I'm just saying he, don't get hung up on it, it's a mouse. But, happy to live here and find their purpose because, that's sort of how they live. And realizing that, Little has no future here, they invite Little to continue with them, and he accepts, of course. And, yeah, so their guide is pretty much useless from here on out. They're just looking after him more than anything. But again, we have that really sad, dour moment with Ruby and Weiss, followed up by a comedic moment here. And then we go to Toy Town, or wherever this place is, and we see that by royal decree, His Royal Highness, is having a birthday. And they mentioned that they have to beat the Red King. So here's what I want to talk about it. So it seems this person, as Ruby is one to do, has been gender flipped and isn't a queen, isn't the Red Queen or the Queen of Hearts, it is the king, which is fine, just not what you'd assume looking at them. But yeah, it seems like we have a king instead. And it seems that despite the heart imagery we saw in, I think it was the trailer, we're going with the Red King going by the storybook that Blake narrates. So okay, the Red King. We have to beat him at a board game, and we'll get to that towards the end. I should also note that especially when Penny was brought up, we had the thunder cracking again. It's very much Ruby's emotions that are affecting the world, and that'll happen much stronger at the end. Now, I don't know if, again, it's only Ruby's emotions because it didn't seem to react to Weiss, or if Ruby's emotions are just so strong that it's affecting it and everyone else's isn't, because there's, despite being serious, is just not that deep compared to Ruby. She's just the most affecting the weather. Although it seems like for simplicity that it's just Ruby's emotions for now affecting the weather. And it happens pretty quickly. You know, the rain will come and go as she talks. So either way, we go to the auction with Jinxie the peddler, who sells disguised items. And you have to sort of buy something without knowing what it is. Now, here's the storybook aspect, where they say that when Alex came through and did this, that they started a riot here, there was a fight, and that they are going to do the same thing, though maybe not intentionally to start. And because of that, and because we know in the storybook that the viewer has to learn, the reader has to learn about the items being fake, you'd assume the same thing happened, that Jinxie was revealed for being a fraud, and then there was a fight. Exactly what happens here. And that is interesting because it seems to have already played out, but yet here we are reset and no one seems to know. No one in the crowd is the wiser. But either way, that's one of those weird storybook logic things of it seems to have already happened, but it's happening again and no one's acknowledging it's happened before. So there's a scepter and a bunny and a little green doll. And Ruby feels very drawn to the green doll. And Yang assumes that the scepter is her arm because it's about the right size, and, you know, it has markings on it that are like her arm, although she doesn't say that. And it's here where we have people ignoring Blake's warnings, especially Yang, who's just like, I'm going to go punch the guy, I'm just going to go take it. And from there, Jinxie starts the auction. And also interesting, Blake notes that he's much older than he was said to be in the book. So the people here are aging. The beings here are aging, although we don't know at what rate. And again, the idea that this has happened before, yet somehow no one is the wiser. It's just how this world works, apparently. Which is fairy tale logic and will come up later, so we'll talk about it some more then. But either way, Jinxie wants to trade sort of metaphorical things or ideas, not money. There's no money in Ever After. So the trade that he wants for the diamond-encrusted rabbit is a hug. So that's an easy trade, and Little says hugs are very valuable. And the scepter is then said to be sold for the price of what it feels like to be loved, which is a very metaphorical thing that is hard to explain. And both Yang and one of the toy soldiers bet on it, and he just writes, you know, whatever Jinxie wants on the royal decree and hands it over and says, this is what it's like to be loved. And how can you argue with that? He got around it. And Yang, of course, you know, is unhappy with this because it's her arm. But the most interesting bit of this is, of course, when Ruby goes up to buy, what Jinxie asks is enough hope to fill this jar. Now again, talking metaphorically, how would you express that? That's incredibly hard. But Ruby freezes. She doesn't have it. She doesn't have enough hope to fill that jar. And it's not a very big jar. You know, that's what we're being told. So, that's, you know, pretty telling about Ruby's mental state if we haven't done that enough already. However, being a bro, Little just tries to steal it. And because he does that, he touches the item before it is sold, which I guess breaks the spell on it, and all the items are revealed. The scepter becomes an arm, the rabbit becomes one of the mice eating one of the cheese plants, and, well, the doll becomes Penny's sword, one of her created swords. And what's interesting is it does show that the size meant nothing. The sword was very different size and stuff to the doll, and that's how we sort of picked out the scepter. But either way, the sword of Penny, and Ruby will talk about this, she was drawn to it. So is that a fairy tale thing? Is it something more spiritual? Interesting enough, I went back to episode 1, and also they revealed the script to screen on Twitter for episode 1, and confirmed it was Penny calling out to Ruby. It was Penny's voice that Ruby heard when she landed on the beach. And I do wonder, we know that the maiden powers went to Winter. She is a maiden, she has her soul combined with Penny and all the other maidens, at least in a trace amount that's left in the powers as they transfer from person to person. But when Ruby said that she was drawn to that sword, and that she has heard Penny's voice echo in the world, it does make me really wonder if a part of Penny's soul, not the part with the maiden powers, we know where that went, I'm not saying Ruby's a maiden, but a part of Penny's soul literally has clung to Ruby in some way. That, be it the magic while we're here, be it something else, be it, you know, love, whatever. But whatever metaphorical power or whatever mechanic you want to call it, I wonder if Penny has attached to Ruby, because you could just call it instinct that, Ruby was drawn to the sword, but she heard the voice of Penny yelling after her, and yeah, maybe it was, a leftover echo from when they were trying to catch her. But if you add these things up, she hears the voice, and she has these really strong emotions when it comes to Penny that will come up even more later, and she is drawn to this sword. She just knew. Maybe there's part of Penny that is attached to Ruby. Especially a line said later, Ruby talks about how Penny saw the world through better eyes than anyone else, through different eyes, She was a positive, happy person. She was optimistic. She was the best of us, sort of thing. That's what she says without me quoting it directly. And what I think is interesting is perhaps that role, that idea of Penny is going to help Ruby out, is going to be something she clings on to, but maybe one of the ways to pull her out of this slump is to try and see the world more like Penny, and perhaps she does that with a little spiritual nudge. So it's just an idea, but I think it has a little bit of merit given what we've seen so far. Call it a theory with 2 pieces of evidence and just some storytelling backup. From there though, of course, a fight breaks out. Everyone is mad at being swindled, and Yang, very comedically, takes her arm back and shoots one of the guards, which he's fine, they're toys. And very funnily at the end, Jinxie has to give the hug back to the person who bought it from him, so that's very cute. Although it seems like we might have made an enemy of Jinxie, which I think will come back later. That Jinxie will not be happy with us, and then Jinxie's gonna have something we need, or be against the team and help out an enemy. Something like that, because it seems like that didn't go well because the team run. They leg it. And after this is where we get the discussion where Blake talks more about the fairy tale and some of the details we've already gone over. But what I think is interesting is, again, we have people moving into those roles where Weiss says, okay, we know this story. We know how the story ends. So even if we are in a fairy tale, as ridiculous as that sounds, we know the ending. We just go straight to the tree. And, skip all the story. We don't need that. We can logic this. And she heads for the tree, and time loops, just loops back, and comedically throws a rock and hits herself in the back of the head, which I think that is a great joke, but maybe not the right time to do it. But again, we have more of this comedic-y storybook telling, these simple, quick, punchy jokes, and they fit this kind of story. And the weirdness, and Little says, yeah, you can't do that. We tried that earlier. You can't just go straight to the tree. So it seems like that, per Ruby's description, we are being forced to follow these footsteps. We're being forced to go through the story. For whatever reason, this is how Everoth operates. You have to go through the steps. And it's here where guards appear, which is good for them because they need to get to the Red Castle. That is the next stop on their journey. And, Ruby makes a full-on storm, changes the weather completely when talking about the loss of Penny here. But another thing I like is Ruby stays true to herself here, where she is cunning, something she's picked up more, and it hasn't always worked out, but Ruby can think on her feet. Ruby is a leader, Ruby is cunning, Ruby is adaptable, and Ruby shows that here. Having learned that it seems like that they have to go to the Red King and beat the Red King in a board game, they have to get into the castle, and rather than being arrested by the guards for stealing a gift they were going to give to the king, Ruby instead offers a better present, the weapon of the greatest warrior ever, who gave her life for thousands, who saw the stars, who did all these things. And in that speech just completely illustrates what kind of person she was. But here we are thinking on her feet. The present you were gonna give to the king isn't good enough. We did steal it, but here's an even better one. And the guards like that logic. Again, they're toys. They're puppets. They're not the most intellectually, gifted. And also, they're following storybook rules. They're following these weird logic rules. So yeah, that's a great gift for the king. And they take it and go to the king, and Ruby makes to follow, and that's where we end. Anyway, the point is that Ruby thinks on her feet here to get them out of being arrested and get them to the party, and uses the sword to do it. Now, I think she's going to want to take it with her. I don't think she's going to want to give it over, but we'll see. And what else is interesting is that she says something very interesting at the end to the team that I think is a really good way to think about what's going on. You have Weiss logicking it out, and that's not working. We should be able to go to the tree. Well, you can't. Why? Because that's how the world works. Sorry, try again. And then you have Blake being like, we are clearly in this fairy tale and we should be paying attention to what happened in the fairy tale, not make the same mistakes if we're trying to escape. And, let's watch where we're going. And Yang's just being comedic relief for now. And Ruby says, let's go with them and let's stop pretending like we know what we're doing. And that's the approach. Roll with the punches. This weird world operates like this, so Ruby adapted and got them invited. Just roll with it and stop pretending that we can change things. Stop pretending we know what we're doing. We just have to face things as it comes. We can't cheat the story. We can't explain the world. We just have to play along. And she does not look happy about this. She is in a horrible mood. But she's being a leader again, and she's given out a very thoughtful plan. So this should be very interesting going forward, and I can't wait to see how this develops more for her. Now that's the end of the story, but we have more to talk about. With the 10-episode runtime, we're already 1/5 of the way through this story. And what that tells me is obviously I really don't think we're seeing any of Remnant this volume except for like a peekaboo at the end. So, we are stuck here doing just this, and we haven't got caught up with Neo, and we haven't caught up with Jean. So, we have those side things to do, and they can be an episode or 2 each. That would take us up to 6 episodes with 4 left, if that were the case. If they had 2 dedicated episodes each, we would still have 4 episodes to finish out this story. I'm not saying that will be the case, it's just an example. So, in that thinking, I think the pacing has been really good so far. I was worried that we weren't going to have enough time, but they have really blasted through the first dot points of their journey. When Blake laid out what they had to do, they'd basically done half of it already. Now, the other things won't be so easy, but beating the king at his board game, that could be an episode. And getting to the tree will be the ending. Meeting the Curious Cat seems like they're going to be a companion, so they'll be around for several episodes. And the Rusted Knight, which we assume is probably going to be Jean. So, seeing those things, it feels... Especially, by the way, I still think there's a lot on Jean being here longer than the others for some magical reason, because Rusted Knight, old, not just the suit of armor, but everything else. Assuming they're not talking about the Smith, but they specifically say Knight, so yeah, I think Jean might have been here for a while. Just saying, backing that up again. I think we're going to find a distressed Jean who has been here for a while, who has, like the others, become assimilated into his role in the story, and might need to be brought back to thinking, that he is still Jean, and that there is even a chance to go back, and all those things. Maybe, just chucking it out there. But what I was going to say is, pacing-wise, we only have 4 things left to do, and we have 8 episodes to do it. So that says that, some of these things aren't going to be as quick, and we have side characters to do things with. But as far as just laying out the dot points of our story, we've already covered half of them in 2 episodes, which is good, because what this volume's going to be about, it really seems, is character stuff. It's going to be dealing with all this stuff going on with Ruby. It's going to be probably finally sealing up Bumblebee, and there might be some hiccups in that as well. So you want some development, some time with them to talk, some lows before all the highs. You need to probably help get Weiss, through whatever she's going through. You have whatever is happening with Neo, which is probably not great. And you have whatever's happened to Jean, which is also probably not great, especially with everything that happened with Penny. So, we have a lot of character stuff to go through. And the ever after of this is just the backdrop, really. It's just the story we have to go through along the way. And what's interesting about that is that it's sort of, the story is forcing them along the dot points. They don't want to really partake. They tried to go straight to the tree. They would just go to the ending, but the world won't let them. So they are almost following this story unwillingly, but they have to leave. And the course of that forced story will likely push them through the developments they need to do. So it's this cool mechanic of having the world force your characters to develop because they don't have a choice but to go along with what the story dictates. And through those journeys, they're going to have development simply forced on them because they're going to have to go through these experiences. I also don't know the Roman holiday book inside and out, so I wanted to leave this bit for the end. But at the reveal that the Red King is a king, that it's a male, I saw floating around on Twitter someone saying that in the story there is at least mentioned a second person who fell, a boy, who I don't think is referenced very much, but there is one line or something somewhere. If that is true, then I think that's who the Red King is. Although that also wouldn't make sense because Alex faced the Red King, right? Unless the boy fell first and became the king and trapped there and never went home before Alex. I'm sort of, talking out of nothing here because I don't know it exactly. But I thought that was interesting and perhaps we should look out for that. Especially with the Red King being like a fractured person, as we seem to have seen implied to us, that, you know, they are broken, and they seem like they might be the moral on if you're trapped here and your mind completely breaks, which Ruby might be on the path to, that, you know, you get trapped in these loops, you get trapped in this fairy tale, you don't get to leave, where Alex did. Which again, we're sort of following Alex's footsteps. We have to go through the path that Alex took. So that could be something to look out for. As for themes and further discussion, obviously Ruby is key here. Ruby is the center. This darkness, this deep depression. And I'm not going to say there's an easy solution for that, because there isn't. Although it's a story, so sometimes there is, because it's a story, but we'll see. And I like the approach that they're taking of talking straight to the audience about, like, hey, we know that there are shades of grey here. We know that they aren't necessarily doing the perfect good guy thing, but this is the result of that, and this is them facing that, and they have to grow. I am looking forward to if they do the Bumblebee thing. Right now, it's being teased to the audience. You know, we had the tackle in the first one with the lovely hug, and we have them brushing hands and joking here. I wouldn't be against an episode or two of a low point again. Again, like I said, maybe, you know, Blake snaps at Yang, being like, stop joking around. Like, stop making jokes, because you're doing it way too much and you're not taking this seriously. Which isn't true, I don't think. I think Yang is just dealing. But, you know, one more real breakthrough, rather than it just being the joyous, happy relationship thing, because again, that seems to speak to what's going on. That, unlike a fairy tale, we're not just taking this simplistic approach. It's not just everything's happy, these two should end up together and will end up together, so they'll just have a happy little journey and end up together by the end. There should at least be a low point. And, you know, people might go, oh no, why? But no, make it feel real. Make that relationship feel more earned on screen, because we have time alone here. That is one of the keys of Ever After, is that no matter what's going on in the world, no matter how bad it is, even though Weiss is thinking, you know, everything I have is gone, you can't do anything about it right now. You just have to go through the steps of the story, it seems, to try and escape. And in order to do that, they have to just start checking things off the list and following the path. And until you get home, you can't do anything about it. So they're alone with their thoughts here, and they're forced to confront them. And that applies in the romance area, that applies in the loss and the questioning, and that applies in the depression area and this dour, very dark side of Ruby that hopefully we fully explore here. And that means that when our characters come out the other side, they will be totally changed, which is what I want to say against people who, I mean, they wouldn't be listening this long, but anyone who really thinks this arc is filler, that's not what filler is. Let's talk about what filler is. Filler is Goku having to go get his driver's license. That's the most famous filler episode I can think of. That adds nothing. Nothing happens. It is a fun episode where they do some fun stuff, and at the end they're the same as they were before, no development on the plot, because they had to actually fill time, because they were waiting for story. That's not what this is. Just because we're not participating in the overarching main plot does not make it filler. It's a journey our characters have to go on that they don't have a choice about, that will change them by the end. And the team, our main characters who are confronting the overarching plot that they are trying to get back to, that is their goal. They recognize the world is in danger, but they don't have a choice. And by the time they get back, they will be different people. And those evolutions will hopefully help them confront whatever it is on the other side. And going through these dark moments, these really dark, dour thoughts and this depression, especially for Ruby, I think is going to be really helpful when she does find whatever her light at the end of the tunnel is, that might help her with Salem. And she might not even get there completely this volume. I don't think Ruby's going to be just fine and happy by the end of this volume and then she's a happy character again until the end. I think that she's going to learn things here, be still struggling when they leave, and then once she's back at Remnant and sees whatever state the world is in and, you know, who's left, or meets up with people that she thought were gone, despite the bad things, is also going to see the good things, and is going to see perhaps the positives in humanity, things like that, things she can talk to, not fight, talk to Salem about, because that's the whole point of Salem, is you have this unbeatable enemy. You can't combat her. It's not the point of the thing. So she has to be, you know, learn to appreciate life, and how can she do that with all her darkness, etc. So Ruby going through this journey, I think, will help with that. And you have other lights, like, you know, you're gonna have that thing of Ruby realizing this relationship of Yang and Blake. Now, there've been hints that she recognized it when they were on the airship at the end of Volume 6, and she gave Yang the look, and Yang sort of gave the look back of like, yeah, this is a thing. But again, they've been very busy since then, and it's definitely not on Ruby's mind, and she is not noticing it right in front of her here. And seeing that as a positive thing, seeing that relationship bloom perhaps in all this darkness could be a positive light for her. And like I said, I really think Penny in some way is going to be involved, whether that be literally involved, like I said, like some actual attachment to Ruby's soul, or just her memory of Ruby trying to emulate her, of having a new sort of idol. Like, she grew up idolizing Crow and her mother, and she's had other things, you know, through the story, but now she might have a new person to idolize. Perhaps she wants to be like Penny, to, you know, bring positivity into the world. That could be something she can do to fight things. And we have lines in the song about, you know, she can't be happy without trying, and maybe that she learns that isn't necessarily, it's not a good thing, but it's not a bad thing, that she will instead try to be happy all the time, perhaps for her friends who can't be anymore, or perhaps to bring that positivity into the world and grow the relationships more like the one her sister is blossoming. There are things like that, and you see here Ruby failed to be the positive light for Weiss right now. She doesn't know the right thing to say. How could you know the right thing to say? Especially when there are questions left. And that's only going to get worse when Jean reappears and they learn things went even worse than they realized. But going through these developments is the point of Ever After, and I think we're really on set to do that in a very productive volume that's going to change things, and that's not filler. Anyway, that's my little rant on that, but I think that might be it for now. That's all the dot points I have for the episode. That's all I can think off the top of my head, and since this is a thoughts video, we'll end it there. I really enjoyed this episode. I think that clarifying the things we have to do to get out of here, the dot points we have to hit in our fairy tale, as well as more demonstration of how the world is forcing them to play along, is a very good approach, because we're learning our rules. Despite it's a world that doesn't seem to have rules, it does have rules. It just has wacky rules. You know, the way the auction worked, the way they got around the guards, the fact they can't use their straightforward logic, that they're learning very quickly and in a way that doesn't feel convenient. Like, they said maybe we're in a fairy tale because Blake is recognizing these things, and rather than just assuming they're right, Little tells them that they're right. He knows where he lives, that's what it's called. And there is more resistance to that, but as they go on, they can't deny these things, and then by the end of the episode, you have Ruby playing along because they don't have a choice. Not because she's totally accepted it, but this is what's in front of them. This is the logic in the world presented to them. They don't have a choice. So we have learnt the rules, we've learnt what we're doing, we've learnt the things we have yet to do, we've introduced Alex into the canon, we've introduced the story into the canon within the show. I know the books are canonical, but you know what I mean. Within the show, on screen, we are learning things, we've made an enemy, it seems like, if not multiple. We are on the way to our next dot point, our next checklist, and we have the characters, despite taking on roles in a story, it seems like, really developing quickly. They're running through these emotions and bringing up things we always thought were there. It's the correct time to do it because they, again, don't have a choice. They're stuck here with their own thoughts and with each other. And those things will hopefully develop pretty quickly and pretty satisfyingly after all this time and make a real change this volume and make it really stand out. If it isn't already with all the visual style and everything. And like I said, just at the end, another shout out to all these animators and all the visuals here, because you can really see the extra polish and time on it, and it's really appreciated. This important volume is being presented in a very good way. It's being presented in a very polished way, and there are less holes and things to poke at, and you can just take in the story, which is the point, especially on this character-driven arc. So, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you all very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Let me know what you thought of it and what you thought of my thoughts. Until next time, my name is Rigger. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope I did alright.